Okay. Now, those of you with the church background, those words toward God, we all know that Morgan Freeman is not God, or most of us in here know Morgan Freeman is not God. Okay, so that is an image of God, a pretty good one, I think, actually a very entertaining image of God. And it also is one that breaks into our ideas that God in this nation has been depicted as a white guy with a beard, usually a white beard. Okay, the image of God is the image of God. Okay, and the image of God in here, more than Morgan Freeman, I want you to hang on to that idea of this man who feels like he's been given a raw deal in life, saying, hey, God, you stink. And he uses stronger words than that. Okay? Many of us, whether we know who God is, whether we think we know who God is, whether we don't want to know who God is, or we're on the path, get into these things in life where we might never say those words about God. And I can tell you I have said those words and far worse in my life because of circumstances that have come. Okay, to understand Jephthah, remember we're not talking about Morgan Freeman, we're talking about Jephthah. Okay, a little bit of the history of Jephthah. Number one, just kind of contextualizing it with where Joseph was at the last couple of weeks. Okay, Abraham, the Israelite, who's not really an Israelite at the time, he's just Abraham, is blessed by God and told that his kids are going to be the ones that give who God is to the rest of the earth, and they're going to multiply greatly. Okay? Then he goes into Egypt, and his kids are enslaved. Now, it's not really him, it's his sons that go into Egypt, but they become slaves for 400 years. Moses comes along, and he becomes God's voice plate and the deliverer of God's people out of Egypt in mighty signs and wonders. Following that, they wander around for 40 years, really because they haven't been trained for battle, and they don't really know what they're doing. Till finally they enter this thing called the Promised Land. Okay? Then a theocracy is set up. Basically, they conquer most of the peoples in the land, and God chooses to rule them without a main leader. And Joseph actually gave that as the context of 400 years after they enter the land of God actually setting up a king because the people say, we can't take it. We just can't take it anymore, God. This isn't working for us. Everybody else has a king. We need a king. But for 400 years, it's God ruling his people. And now and then when they need somebody to come and deliver them from an enemy, he sets up a person called a judge. Okay, now, other judges in the Bible you may have heard of or thought about. One's named Samson. Samson was a judge, probably the most famous judge. Okay, another one is Samuel, the one that predates Saul and David. Jephthah is not one of the foremost judges you might talk about, but Jephthah actually shows a unique piece of Israel's history. And in some ways, I think he relates to our culture in ways that others of the judges we might not relate to. Okay, so that's the idea. The theocracy is stated. Every time the people of God turn away from him and go to false gods, then he puts a judge in place to overcome God's enemies. So here's Jephthah. Okay, and here's his context. And I'd like you to read some of this with me, just to get an idea of the context of Jephthah lives in. This is what happens to force Jephthah into the need to be a judge. He's a Gileadite, and it says right here, can you read with me? Again, the Israelites did evil in God's sight. They served the images of Baal and Ashtoreth. Now, skip down here because these are a bunch of nations. They abandoned God and no longer served him at all. Now, there's all these cultures in there. They're serving false gods, okay? They've watched this God take them out of Egypt. They've watched this God do mighty, mighty things, but he kind of fades in different generations. And so they gravitate towards the cultures around them and their gods. Now, when you say false gods here, you're talking some serious gods. Many of the gods of these nations practiced one called Shamash in Philistine. Child sacrifice was a regular part of worshiping that particular god. With Ashtoreth and Baal, the different gods that they worshiped, sacrifice of much more, sometimes blood, sometimes sexual intercourse would be a part of worship. Things that God had set up that were not okay for his people were the things that his people would gravitate towards. And when they would leave him, he would do just this, okay? he would burn with anger. So God burned with anger against Israel, and he turned them over. He would turn them over, not in a, I mean, you think, oh, what a mean dad. What a mean God. Well, he just let them go the way they were following. And so that's exactly what God did with his people in this case. They followed other gods, so he said, okay, that makes me mad, but go. So for 18 years, the people in this area of Israel are persecuted by the people of these false gods. And then finally, after 2 decades, they cry out to God, we have sinned against you because we have abandoned you as our God and have served the images of Baal. Okay, so 3 things. False gods, he gives them over, and then they cry out. Okay, now back to Jephthah. He's the one that comes into this time. Now remember his background. He's the son of the prostitute, and then he's lost his father's inheritance because his brothers kick him out. Okay, where he goes from that is the people see they need somebody mighty. He, while he's kicked out, develops this band of warriors. They all gravitate. They're not a very nice band of warriors, you know. And is there really a nice band of warriors? Think about that. Is there a nice band of warriors? No. Jephthah's a mighty guy. Mighty guys that are not mighty nice gather around him, and his brothers themselves go back to get Jephthah, and his people go back and say, hey, look, this is not working out for us. We need somebody to lead us. We need somebody to deliver us. This must happen. So the conquering enemies come into the land to attack. Okay, Jephthah is asked back, and he says, how can I trust you? Now, if you think about that, sometimes that's what we're saying to God when he's asking us to go do something we might be well built to do. Well, how can I trust you? You got to be kidding me. I mean, has that happened to you? Well, maybe it hasn't. Okay, then think about somebody else in your life that says, will you do this? And you think, I don't trust you. Well, Jephthah has every reason to think, God, you gave me a bum deal. But he's built differently than that. And whatever has been built in his character over the time he's been kicked out and developed his might and developed this band kicks in. And he doesn't shake his fist at God or tell God he stinks. Instead, he represents God very well. Very well.